Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I know it's only 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, but I'm here in Moscow where it's roughly 9 p.m. So I'm here streaming for you all once again. We're going to have a great evening or afternoon chat. Should be a lot of fun. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. Let's do it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Let's do it.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you. The way we do these streams, no matter where I am located, is always the same. I give my opening remarks, which is whatever it is that I want to talk about, whatever's on my mind. And then from there, after that, I do a roll call where we find out who is watching, names and locations. And it's always very exciting to find out who's on the other side of the camera, who's watching. Then from there, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like to talk to me about in the second half of our program, all you need to do is send me a super chat. And I will do my best to give you an answer in the second half of our show. That's the way this works. That's the way things work here. So I'm really glad to be here with all of you. I must admit, unfortunately, it is springtime in Moscow, just like it's springtime in the United States. And I am having a little bit of spring allergies. I've been blowing my nose a lot lately. Other than that, I'm very comfortable. I'm at a lovely, lovely hotel here in Moscow, and I'm very excited. The festival was a great event, but it was very tiring. A lot happened. You saw that I got to talk to the Russian president, and a lot happened. So many high-level meetings, etc. But after that, things have slowed down. But now I'm gearing up to be an observer of the Russian election. So that's going to be very, very exciting. And I've rested here at my hotel, and I'm getting myself energized once again. I'm still dealing with these allergies, but I would have them back in the United States as well. There's nothing uniquely Russian about these allergies, right? It might even be worse in the United States. I'm blowing my nose a lot. But yeah, we are going to have a great conversation. Just a quick announcement. For those of you who may not be familiar, the organization that I have founded and that I'm leading, that brought me here to Russia for the World Youth Festival and as an election observer, the organization is called the Center for Political Innovation. And we at the Center for Political Innovation are having a national retreat. A 4-day gathering in Vermont is taking place April 26th through 29th. And I would like as many people to attend as possible. So if you are of interest in, spending 4 days, getting to know other members of our anti-imperialist community, sitting through some classes and group activities, etc., I would like you to come to our 4-day national gathering in Vermont. It is going to be very awesome and very exciting. That's the link where you can sign up for it. Center for Political Innovation's National 4-day educational workshop, a City Builders National Educational Workshop, April 26th through 29th, out of the movement to the masses. It's going to be really, really tremendous. So I hope that you will sign up. I hope to have as many people there as possible. It's going to be a great, great 4 days. So I really, really hope to see you there. Just wanted to get that announcement out of the way as we're starting up this stream. So yeah, there we go. Just wanted to throw that announcement out there. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Tweet this out. I don't know about you folks, but I have a feeling that that social media is suppressed when it is released in this part of the world. YouTube and the people who run YouTube don't necessarily want people to watch folks who are streaming from where I am currently streaming. So if you can help expand this, usually I stream on 3 different platforms. I stream on Rockfin, Rumble, and YouTube. However, I am unable to log in to Rockfin and Rumble from here because my login was connected to my Facebook, and Facebook is blocked here in Russia for security purposes that are very obvious. And we're gonna have an interesting conversation about all of that tonight because we're talking about how the U.S. Congress just passed a bill. It still has to go through the Senate. Then it would have to be signed into law, a bill to ban TikTok. And that's going to be kind of the theme of my opening remarks for tonight. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things because there's many layers that we need to come at this with. I am totally against the TikTok ban. However, I think it makes sense for Russia to ban Facebook and Twitter. I think that makes perfect sense. So there's many layers to this, and we'll get into it. We'll get into it. Yeah, but just a quick reminder though, the way this show works, opening remarks about whatever it is I want to talk about. As I'm giving my opening remarks, I am waiting for your super chats to come in, and I am noting your super chats as they come in. And then the second half of the show, after I do the roll call, is all you. It is all you. I answer your super chat questions in the second half of our show. So there's something you would like me to talk about, a question you've got, a thought, something you want me to respond to. People ask me about historical events. People ask me about movies, anything you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat. Great. All right. So I'm going to jump right into my opening remarks. So I don't know if folks recall, in the spring of last year, there was some talk of banning TikTok. And the piece of legislation that they put together to enact that TikTok ban was a very, very frightening one. It was called the Restrict Act. And it wouldn't have simply banned TikTok. It would have given the government all kinds of sweeping power to declare any software company or anybody to be a foreign entity, an entity spreading foreign propaganda, something like that, and seize your assets and imprison you. It was a sweeping piece of legislation. It didn't pass. Senator Rand Paul opposed it. The Libertarians opposed it. AOC opposed it. All kinds of people looked at the Restrict Act and they said, this is completely outrageous. And so the Restrict Act died. So now they're back to the table with their talk of banning TikTok. They have a new piece of legislation that was just passed by the U.S. House of Representatives. This new piece of legislation would ban TikTok by giving the TikTok corporation 40 days to end their relationship with their Chinese parent company, ByteDance. And that's basically what it would have to do. TikTok would have to be sold to another owner because it could not be owned by Chinese shareholders, even though it's completely run from the United States, even though the Chinese government has absolutely nothing to do with TikTok, even though TikTok is a completely domestic corporation, regardless. They're saying that ByteDance would have to sell it within 40 days, or else it would become illegal in US app stores to sell TikTok. Now, there's a couple layers to this. First off, TikTok is not controlled by the Chinese government. And the owners of TikTok have worked very, very, very hard to make sure that that is not the case. There's a version of TikTok in China that's completely different, that is subject to mainland China censorship, complies with mainland China laws. TikTok has been set up especially to not be part of that. TikTok has been set up for use outside of China. And the idea that TikTok is pushing Chinese propaganda is absurd. There is an endless amount of anti-China propaganda on TikTok and an endless amount of anti-Russian propaganda on TikTok. And in fact, Joe Biden, he mobilized TikTokers to make propaganda against Russia during the opening of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. TikTok is not pushing a pro-Chinese government message. It just simply is not doing that. And anyone who looks at TikTok, I mean, you just look at it for yourself. You can tell that that is the case. But on top of that, TikTok has gone out of its way to do the opposite, to make sure that people that are anti-China, to make sure that people that are pro-US get a highlighted standing on TikTok. TikTok has suppressed various people. I know people who've had their TikTok channels banned and all kinds of things like that. The idea that TikTok is some kind of pro-Chinese entity is absurd. However, what is not absurd is that Facebook and Twitter are controlled by the American government and are used by the American government for propaganda purposes. This is something that we know to be true. I mean, there's no doubt about this. There's not a shadow of a doubt about this. We know this for a number of reasons. Number one, we know that when Hunter Biden's laptop was reported on by the New York Post right before the 2020 elections, right before the 2020 elections, they had a news item that Hunter Biden, the son of U.S. current U.S. President Joe Biden, who was on the ballot in the election, that his laptop had turned up at a laptop repair store, and they'd found all kinds of criminal, disgusting things on his laptop. And the New York Post decided to report on this. Fair story, right? Major candidate who ended up winning the election, his son is involved in all kinds of criminal activities. So the New York Post, which is a mainstream publication, it's actually a quite conservative publication in the United States. It's a tabloid, right? It's the New York Post. It's one of the daily tabloids in New York City. The New York Post ran a story about Hunter Biden's laptop. And what we now know is that the FBI called up Twitter and called up Facebook and told them not to allow the story to be shared. And so they actually blocked the link to this New York Post story. Now, this wasn't even an RT story. This wasn't a story from Chinese media. This was a story from a mainstream US media outlet, the New York Post, was blocked by Facebook and Twitter. You could not. And I tried to tweet out the link. You couldn't tweet out the link. I tried to send the story to friends on Facebook. You couldn't send the link. You couldn't post the link. It was blocked. It was a banned link. The Hunter Biden laptop story from the New York Post was banned. It was banned in order to make sure that no one shared this story. Well, now everyone agrees that the story was true. Hunter Biden's laptop was real. It wasn't fake. The allegations of what was on the laptop regarding business deals, they were not fake either. It was a true story. Right? Super chats are appreciated. They'll be answered in the second half of the show. It was a true story. However, Facebook and Twitter suppressed it at the request of the FBI. Now, if that right there tells you everything you need to know, then at this point we can agree that Facebook and Twitter are US government propaganda. But it goes further. It goes further, right? The Twitter files were revealed by Elon Musk. When Elon Musk assumed ownership of Twitter, he revealed all kinds of emails. He provided emails. He provided emails to Matt Taibbi, and they revealed, and it was held before Congress and in the congressional record and all kinds of things. They revealed that the FBI frequently sits down with the bosses of Twitter and helps them decide what stories get to go viral and what stories don't, and what users get promoted and what users get suppressed and who gets banned. And the FBI and the owners of Twitter are frequently in touch with each other, deciding very partisan political decisions about what gets promoted and what does not get promoted. And that was revealed. And we've got the emails that they wanted to defeat Donald Trump, and that they thought that Donald Trump should not win the 2020 election in the United States. So Facebook and Twitter were talking with the FBI, and the FBI was telling them to suppress certain stories. This is now public record. So Facebook and Twitter have been fully cooperating with the American government to meddle, not just in countries around the world, but in countries, the homeland, the United States. Like, that's been revealed. Again, you don't have to, this is not foreign propaganda. These are facts, right? The Hunter Biden laptop story was banned by Twitter and by Facebook on request of the FBI. The FBI is revealed to be in frequent contact with Twitter and was rigging Twitter to suppress social media perspectives from conservatives and Trump supporters and dissidents. That's been revealed, right? But we can go even further, right? We know that the Hillary Clinton State Department during the presidency of Barack Obama was frequently in touch with the owners of Twitter during the Arab Spring. And this has been revealed. Jared Andrew Cohen, who is a former exec of Google Alphabet, was an employee of the Hillary Clinton State Department, and he acted as the liaison between Silicon Valley and the social media giants and the White House. And that at one point, he even went to Twitter and asked them to not engage in a certain maintenance operation that they had planned, because they wanted the protests in Iran against the government in the aftermath of President Ahmadinejad's reelection. They wanted the protests in Iran to be aided by Twitter. And so as a result of that, Jared Andrew Cohen went to Twitter, and Twitter changed its activities in order to help protests against the Iranian government. Barack Obama heard about this and was angry because it was done without his permission. And he tried to fire Jared Andrew Cohen for doing this. And then we find out that Jared Andrew Cohen was not fired. Somehow Hillary Clinton was able to overrule the president of the United States and prevent Jared Andrew Cohen from being fired, because he went to the tech companies and gave them instructions without Barack Obama's permission. So, I mean, there's many, many examples of this. Anyone who tells you that's a conspiracy theory, and I want to slap people. There's just certain people that just will not believe anything that goes against the standard American line. And so if you say to them, hey, Facebook and Twitter are controlled by the FBI, and the CIA and the US government, and they use them, they'll go, that's a conspiracy theory. And I mean, how much more evidence do you need to show them? I mean, we've got the emails, the Twitter files. I mean, we've got the news reporting about Facebook and Twitter, suppressing the story of Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, all the evidence is there. So it's just a matter of people choosing to not acknowledge something. If something's inconvenient for them, they just say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, something doesn't become a conspiracy theory just because it's inconvenient for your narrative. And also, let's keep in mind that even the word conspiracy theory itself isn't, just because you have a theory, something that you think may be true that you don't know to be true, and it involves people conspiring, that doesn't make it false, right? This label of conspiracy theory, right? We know that this is a term that has been weaponized, um, you know, um, that has been weaponized by the intelligence apparatus, right? That they've labeled ideas that they don't like as conspiracy theories, which they may be. They may be theories about people conspiring, but that does not make them false simply because that is what they are. They are a conspiracy about people conspiring. They've invented this whole word that they've invented. You know, basically to shut down critical thought. That is a conspiracy theory. It's really, really important. As Jenny Lynn points out, every detective is a conspiracy theorist. Exactly. I mean, just because you have a theory regarding a conspiracy doesn't mean that there is no conspiracy, doesn't make you insane, right? So even the term conspiracy theory is itself a weird term, but putting all of that aside, right? The idea that Twitter and Facebook are controlled by our intelligence agencies in the United States is a fact. I mean, it's fact at this point. Anyone who doubts that is Looney Tunes. I mean, it is just there is no doubt about it. However, it looks like TikTok is the one very popular app that they do not control. Because why would they be trying to ban it? Right? It seems like for whatever reason, because of who its parent company is, or for whatever reason, while the FBI has the ability to call up Facebook and just say, do what we say, and they have the ability to call up Twitter and just say, do what we say, they seem to not have that ability with TikTok. Now, I'm sure that there is some level of communication between the TikTok execs and the American government in order to make sure they comply with U.S. law, reporting any criminal activity, etc. I'm sure that there is communication between TikTok's owners and the U.S. government to some degree, right? And I'm sure that that is the case. However, it appears that TikTok is not completely under the control of the U.S. intelligence apparatus. And that seems to be why they want to shut it down so desperately, right? Even though they probably have some leverage with it, right? Because if TikTok is lost to an American audience, I mean, they lose out, and TikTok, in order to get favors, and I mean, I'm sure that there is some level of communication between the American government and TikTok, but it just appears that they don't have the same level of control over TikTok that they have over the other social media applications. That seems to be the case. And that is what is behind this drive to ban TikTok. That is what it is relentless, right? It's already illegal on government devices because they fear it could somehow be used for spying, which that's never been proven. Even though it is proven by Edward Snowden that American telecom communications corporations are doing all kinds of spying and enabling of U.S. espionage. They have a whole building set up in Manhattan. Have you heard about this building with no windows on it? Right, it's been right building with no windows, Manhattan. Have you heard about this building that's owned by AT&T? This scary building that they used to that basically they used to surveil the United Nations and a bunch of foreign missions, etc. Yeah, well, in case you didn't know about it, right? Edward Snowden revealed that this building, 33 Thomas Street in Manhattan, this spooky building, this is a surveillance hub, that's been set up so that AT&T, an American telecom giant, cooperates very closely with U.S. law enforcement and U.S. intelligence, and they, out of this building, they do all kinds of surveillance of the United Nations, of UN missions. They're violating people's country's sovereignty and etc. This is particularly outrageous. So I mean, meanwhile, we're told that maybe, possibly, the Chinese government through TikTok could spy on people, which again, no way to prove it, and especially when TikTok isn't actually made in China, right? I mean, it's the company is not, it doesn't operate in China. It's not available on the Chinese mainland. The whole story is outlandish, and they just keep repeating it, right? And it's one of those examples of those things. If you just say them enough times, if you just say it enough times, people assume that it's true. Right? I mean, meanwhile, we can prove over and over and over again the reality of Facebook, the reality of Twitter, and people don't acknowledge it. And with TikTok, they just say, oh, the Chinese communists are using. How do you know? Prove that. And then they have no proof of this, but they just say it over and over again, and people believe it. And it's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. But I want to mention, though, about Donald Trump's response to Congress passing the bill to ban TikTok. Very interesting response. I don't know if folks saw this, but Donald Trump has in the past said he wants to ban TikTok. But when Congress passed the bill, the House of Representatives passed the bill, the Senate has not yet passed it. When the Senate passed the bill to ban TikTok, Donald Trump was asked about it, and he said he was against it because banning TikTok would help Facebook, and Facebook has too much power. A very, very interesting choice of words from Donald Trump. He's against it because it would lead to empowering Facebook, and Facebook has too much power. Now, that's an interesting choice of words because we know that Facebook is one of these social media apps that suppressed Donald Trump and the story about the Hunter Biden laptop, and was involved in the efforts that ultimately led to Donald Trump leaving office, right? That Facebook slanted pretty far against Donald Trump during the 2020 elections. This is all very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Now, folks, there's a lot of information here that, again, nobody talks about, but I talk about, right? In my book, Where is America Going? Right? In chapter 1 of my book, and I talk about this because it's very important to understand. I have a section, Where did the computer revolution come from? Because that's a very, very important thing to understand if you want to understand our modern world. We are given the popular understanding of where the computer revolution came from, that we are given is that there were capitalism is just such an amazing system, right? That there were these nerds who tinkered around in their garages and they had a new idea. And with the magic of the free market, these nerds that had their own new idea invented a computer and became billionaires. And that's why capitalism is just so amazing. And there should be no taxes on rich people because of that. That's the narrative that I got when I was a kid, right? These Apple millionaires, these IBM guys, they were just smart and they tinkered around in their garages and they had a new idea. And you can't do that in a communist society, but in our great free America, why some guy can just tinker in his garage and be super smart and have him an idea, and by golly, he becomes rich because the free market is magic, right? This is what the libertarians believe. It's probably what Javier Milei believes, right? The free market is magic. Well, that's not actually what happened, right? And there's a very good section in my book. I talk about where did the computer revolution come from. right? And this is all very, very interesting. Now, the roots of the computer revolution, I've often pointed out, they go back to Alan Turing and his decoder machine that he created during the Second World War. Alan Turing, ooh, that's an interesting bit of information. Thank you. And more super chats are appreciated. I'll respond to each of them in the second half of the show. Alan Turing was a British mathematical genius, an intellectual, a philosopher, and a mathematician. And it was during the war, when the British economy, during the Second World War, became completely militarized, he was tapped by the British government to design a decoding machine to translate Nazi code messages. And so they grabbed him and they provided him with resources, and they put this smart guy to work, and with all kinds of government backing, because of a government decision made by military people, and military is government. Alan Turing designed his decoder machine, which was a very elaborate machine, which is the basis of modern computing. Now, did Alan Turing become rich for making the decoder machine? No. Did Alan Turing, did he become super, super wealthy and did he become an Apple millionaire? No. Alan Turing ended up, continuing to be a math professor after the war was over. He was caught being gay, and he was forced to take medicine intended to cure his homosexuality, and he ended up committing suicide. It's a very sad story. Now, a lot of his writing, as a philosopher who understood the concept of a thinking machine, a lot of it gets referred to nowadays in the age of artificial intelligence. It's actually rather important, because he was talking about how do you get a machine to mimic human thought. It's a very, very interesting thing. But Alan Turing, first of all, the free market didn't create his innovation, first of all. Second of all, he didn't get rich from it. Then, computers continued, and there was, some developments during the 1950s and 60s. But we know that really what gave the impetus to the computer revolution was a guy who knew absolutely nothing about computers, a guy who studied geopolitics, and that was Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was the Cold War strategist of Columbia University, a Polish-born American man of Polish descent who hated Russians on an ethnic level. He was a Polish Catholic, and he hated Russian Orthodox people, and it goes way beyond communism. This is an ethnic thing that goes back very far, right? Some people in Poland really hate Russians. Not all. There's some people in Poland who really love Russians, right? But there are some people in Poland who have a real bone to pick with the Russians. And Zbigniew Brzezinski's family is one of them. And when Poland had a communist revolution following the Second World War, was liberated by Soviet troops, he didn't like it one bit. His family fled to Canada and then eventually fled to the United States. And he became the leader of what they called the Cold War University at Columbia University, the School of International Relations. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was all about being more strategic during the Cold War. He thought that the military-industrial complex was too aggressive. And during the height of the Vietnam War protest movement in 1970, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book called Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era. And that book, it's out of print. I think you can find like a reprint of it on Amazon. That book that was published in 1970, right? I bought it because I wanted to, do research for my writing, and I wanted to understand the perspective. I thought that I was reporting, absolutely. I thought that I was reporting on, I was going to read a book about computers, and instead I read a book about communism, right? The book really, Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era, written by Zbigniew Brzezinski, is all about communism. And it's about how the way to defeat communism is through control of information. And basically, he argues in the book that the new left of the 1960s, the protest movement against the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, that these do not represent a threat of communist revolution, he argues. He says instead, they are just changes in the culture related to the accessibility of information, the fact that TV is widely available, the fact that international TV broadcasts can broadcast events on the other side of the world. You can watch the moon landing on television. All of this, he argued, this new accessibility of information is changing the way people relate to one another. People's relationship with traditional ideas, with authority, is changing. And that's what motivated what he called the new left, right? The hippie counterculture, people not being as religious as they once were, people exploring orthodox ideas, people not wanting to fight in Vietnam. This is because there's more information out there than there used to be. And because there's more information, people's attitude toward things is changing. And in the book, he says that the way that the United States can defeat communism is by the United States positioning itself at the center of the information revolution, and that through control of information, the world can be Americanized. That's what he's arguing, that through control of information, the world can be Americanized. And that the United States is already ahead in terms of media, right? The socialist countries are industrializing, building power plants, etc. The United States is already industrialized, and it's got a very sexy mass media. It's got Hollywood, it's got international television, etc. And Brzezinski is arguing that the way to bring down the Soviet Union, the way to bring down communism, is through putting the United States at the center of the information revolution. And what we know is that after the USA withdrew from Vietnam, the understanding in foreign policy circles in the United States was that there had to be a rethinking of U.S. foreign policy. So in 1973, excuse me, an organization was created. I told you my spring allergies. An organization was created called the Trilateral Commission, and it was run by two individuals, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, both of whom were, a product of the Rockefeller family. Now, the Rockefellers are one of the wealthiest families, probably the wealthiest family in the United States. No one can really calculate how much money they have. That's how wealthy they are. They're oil monopolists. They come from John D. Rockefeller, who was an oil monopolist who created Standard Oil. ExxonMobil is the current incarnation of J.P. Morgan, or of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Chase Bank is also Rockefeller property. There are a number of different institutions in the United States that trace their roots back to the Rockefellers. They are the main financiers of Riverside Church in Manhattan, which is a very important religious institution. They provided the land on which the United Nations was established. The Rockefellers, provided the land for, they donated the land on which the UN was created. Most universities in the United States get some kind of subsidy or some kind of grant money or something. I mean, the Rockefellers are one of the richest and most powerful families. And they basically cultivated Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski because they saw them as individuals who would be strategic in putting forward the interests of the United States against the Soviet Union. And after the end of the Vietnam War, Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, they ran the Trilateral Commission, and they wrote a number of documents about how to reinvent U.S. foreign policy in order to defeat the Soviet Union, and what went wrong in Vietnam, and how the culture of U.S. society had changed. And the Trilateral Commission, a lot of what they wrote about was computers and the computer revolution. And we now know, and it's just, you can Google this. No one pretends otherwise, that it was the intelligence agencies that created Silicon Valley. Apple got stronger and emerged due to loans that were arranged from the U.S. deep state, loans, funding, contracts, and the same can be said for Microsoft, and the same can be said for IBM, and the same can be said for all of these corporations, right? That Amazon, right? Amazon was very heavily involved in establishing what became Silicon Valley. I don't know if folks remember, but during the 2000 election, that was the election where Al Gore ran against George W. Bush. And that was the election, in which the two candidates ran against each other. Al Gore and George W. Bush were running for office, and Al Gore was widely ridiculed because he was quoted as saying, quote, "I invented the internet." And it was an interesting controversy because it was, the internet was a new thing at the time. It was a new technological advancement. I know, like, schools and libraries were starting to get the internet in the late 90s, and Al Gore was quoted as saying, "I invented the internet." Now, that's not exactly what he said. If you looked at the context of what he was saying, he was bragging about the fact that he oversaw government policies that helped to establish the tech monopolies. Right? And if you read, you can read the Wikipedia page about Al Gore and information technology. Al Gore and the Democratic Party were heavily involved in pushing the U.S. deep state, the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies, etc., to fund the creation of what eventually became the internet, right? And this is a fact. This is a fact. So again, this is where computer technology came from. It is a product of the deep state. It is a product of a geostrategic decision. You'll notice a couple other examples. Timothy Leary, who was the big drug guru during the 1960s, right? He was a Harvard professor who pushed LSD and hallucinogens. He eventually, he fled the United States. He was abducted in Afghanistan. He was taken back to the United States. He went to prison. After Timothy Leary went to prison, he toured the United States. He got out of prison and he continued promoting drugs, touring the United States, but he went around giving a speech all about computers and how amazing computers are and how amazing the internet is. And he would say, who controls the screen controls society. So we have to democratize the screen. And with computers, you can control the screen, man. And that, Timothy Leary, the rambling drug guru, Timothy Leary, who was a known CIA asset, he first started using drugs because of Project MK Ultra when the CIA was distributing LSD on college campuses. He went around promoting drugs during the time of MK Ultra. He went to prison. He got out of prison. It's now confirmed that when he got out of prison, he was an FBI informant. He was, informing to the FBI the entire time for the rest of his life until he died. And he was also going around urging everyone, who came to his lectures about drugs, urging them all to support Silicon Valley and the computer revolution. Jerry Rubin. I don't know if people know the name Jerry Rubin. Jerry Rubin was a 1960s radical. And he also had a change of heart, right? He'd originally been a yippie for the Youth International Party, and they went around promoting drug use. But then in the early 80s, Jerry Rubin became a yuppie, right? And he and Abby Hoffman went around the country having a debate with one another called Yuppie versus Yippie. And Jerry Rubin would talk about why he thought that the 1960s radicals were too soft on communism. They were not anti-communist enough, and that computers were the future, and it was all about we need computers, and why these young urban professionals who work at computer companies, they're the hope, and he was a yuppie. It's very, very, very interesting. A very, very, very interesting pattern. Now, Al Gore, right, as I told you, and this Wikipedia page goes on to talk about, okay, he didn't literally himself invent the internet, but Al Gore was very, very heavily involved in the process of making sure the government arranged for computer technology to take off the way it did. We also know that Al Gore had a spiritual advisor. And this is where it gets really interesting. Nobody talks about this. I say that a lot. Nobody talks about this, but people do talk about it. I mean, the people who talk about it tend to be, conspiracy kind of people. It tends to be Alex Jones types. But this should be of very big interest to anyone who's a leftist or a socialist or anything like that. So Al Gore, right? I think his official religion was that he was a Baptist, but he's a Democratic senator, vice president. His religious beliefs are not. He's not simply going to the Baptist church down the street. We now know that Al Gore, his spiritual advisor, was a woman named Marilyn Ferguson. Now, Marilyn Ferguson, she claimed that she was a psychic, and she went to Al Gore's home, and she was his personal spiritual advisor. And for hours, she would sit with Al Gore, and she was almost kind of like his therapist and psychoanalyst, but she was also getting messages from space or I don't know, whatever, right? She was his spiritual medium, Marilyn Ferguson. And Marilyn Ferguson is not just anybody. Right. And she, the Clintons really liked Marilyn Ferguson also. The Clintons brought her to the White House. They had receptions for her at the White House. And Marilyn Ferguson is also heavily involved in Silicon Valley. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. So Marilyn Ferguson, the occult guru, she wrote a 1980 book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And it was all about how there's a great uprising going on. And it's neither pro-communist or anti-communist. It's just an awakening of the human spirit, and it involves hallucinogens and using drugs, and it involves meditation, and it involves hypnosis, and it involves all of this, and it's neither pro-communist or anti-communist. It's just about human enlightenment, and a big thing is about environmentalism. We got to bring the world back into balance with Mother Nature. Human beings are not environmental enough, and we're using too many resources, and there's going to be this great explosion. It's called the Aquarian Conspiracy. The Aquarian Conspiracy, it's called. And she wrote this book in 1980 that was very widely circulated throughout the United States and throughout the Western world. And in the book, she says, America is free, but California is freer. And she names the Stanford Research Institute as being ground zero for the Aquarian conspiracy that's going to free mankind. The Stanford Research Institute. Well, the Stanford Research Institute, look that up. That's Stanford, California, right? Stanford Research Institute. It's in California. It's in Northern California. And not only is the Stanford Research Institute, it is a place that is very heavily involved in Silicon Valley and developing the computer revolution and developing, technological breakthroughs. However, it's considered 1966. They had the first artificial intelligence center at Stanford Research Institute. However, right, Stanford Research Institute is also a known intelligence hub. It is a known CIA intelligence place. And you can Google Stanford Research Institute and the Vietnam War, Stanford Research Institute, and you will learn all about how the Stanford Research Institute is known to be a CIA. It is a CIA, I don't know what you want to call it, a CIA, airport practice. I mean, a CIA stomping ground. It is like ground zero for the CIA. So if you look at all of this, right, you can understand some of what's going on. Because again, there's this narrative that people have, the internet just came out of nowhere. It was these guys tinkering around in their garages. No, it was invented to serve a geopolitical purpose. It was to, put the United States at the center of the technotronic era that Brzezinski spoke about. It was to make the United States the center of control of information in order to destabilize countries and make sure that carry out this Aquarian conspiracy that Marilyn Ferguson wanted, that involved, overthrowing socialist and communist governments and securing the rule of the world for certain institutions, right? If we can understand all of this, we can understand why they're threatened by TikTok, because TikTok is not something that they created. It's just not, right? Twitter and Facebook are very much something that was created by the American deep state. And that seems to be why Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene don't like it either, because the American deep state doesn't like them for whatever reason. And that's interesting. That's very interesting. And I'm impressed that Marjorie Taylor Greene is against the ban on TikTok. I'm impressed that Donald Trump has said he's against it. I'm impressed. I must say, the big thing to remember is that when did social media really take off, right? I remember MySpace. Does anyone remember MySpace? I remember MySpace. It used to be the only social media device that was out there was this shitty thing called MySpace. People used MySpace, whatever. But then it was right before Barack Obama got elected president, at the very end of George W. Bush's presidency. All of a sudden, Facebook was everywhere. And at first, you had to have a college account. You had to have an email that ended in .edu in order to have a Facebook. It was just a college thing, but pretty soon it blew up into everybody was having it. Facebook and Twitter were very much the game changer. Because what happened? The neocons had been running the United States. Right? George W. Bush's administration was kind of the last hurrah of the neoconservatives, the neocons. And when the neocons, when the neocons lost out, right? When the neocons lost out and lost control, the way that the Eastern establishment and kind of the sinister forces of liberalism and the intelligence agencies were kind of able to insert their upper hand was suddenly Facebook and Twitter were everywhere. That was the thing. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Facebook and Twitter were there. And, it wasn't just cable news that dominated things. The news cycle was controlled. There was a new source of information that very much gave the upper hand to liberals. And what we now call wokeism can trace its roots back to those times. Now, there was still a real left, during those years, right? You still had, people that believed in what generally is considered leftism. But, the very beginning of wokeism, people remember Tumblr, right? And there were all these people talking about privilege and, privilege and check your privilege and mansplaining and all that. All that stuff came from Tumblr, and it was gradually through the tech monopolies that the so-called left got the upper hand over conservatism. The neocons were out, but it was also through that genuine leftism was also pushed to the side. And that instead of genuine leftism, we got this new thing called wokeism. Right. Wow. So, the fact that they want to ban TikTok, this tells you that they can't control TikTok. And that's what it tells you. It makes me wish I did more on that app, honestly. I don't use TikTok very much. But maybe I should. Maybe I ought to learn to use TikTok, because it seems like the app that they are not in control of, that they want to dominate more than anything. So those are my thoughts on the whole TikTok situation. Before I end my opening remarks, though, I wanted to play just this short clip of Russian President Vladimir Putin, because when he spoke, I was at the World Youth Festival, And when he gave his speech at the end of the World Youth Festival, this is something he said in his speech, and I want you to listen carefully to what he said. Right? Put aside your biases and your thoughts about the Russian president for a minute. Listen to what he says in this clip.
Мы появляемся на свет равными, но вопрос, растем ли мы, развиваемся ли мы в равных условиях?
So, we are born equal. But the question is, do we grow? Do we develop in equal conditions?
Ответ, к сожалению, нет. Равных условий в мире для всех не существует.
Answer: unfortunately, no. There are no equal conditions in the world for everyone.
И это главная несправедливость сегодняшнего мироустройства, сегодняшнего мира.
This is the main injustice of today's world order, today's world.
А если вы меня спросите, а можно ли сделать так, чтобы все были в равных условиях и росли в равных условиях, развивались, раскрывали свои таланты на пользу своим близким, своей семье, своей стране, а может быть и всему человечеству?
And if you ask me, is it possible to make sure that everyone is on equal terms and that everyone grows in equal conditions, develops, reveals their talents for the benefit of their loved ones, their family, their country, and perhaps all of humanity?
Я не знаю.
I don't know.
Но что я точно знаю? Мы все должны стремиться к этому.
But I know for sure that we should all strive for this.
Даже сам факт того, что мы будем к этому стремиться, уже это сделает мир более прозрачным, более справедливым, более демократичным, более устойчивым, сбалансированным и более безопасным.
The very fact that we will strive for this will make the world more transparent, fairer, more democratic, more sustainable, balanced and safer.
Дорогие друзья, вы приехали в Россию, у вас появилось здесь много друзей.
Dear friends, you came to Russia. You made many friends here.
Я хочу, чтобы вы знали, Россия теперь ваш друг.
I want you to know that all of Russia is now your friend.
Yeah, so what that sounded oddly communist to me. When he's saying that there's not equality in the world, and he would like to get to a world where everyone has equal opportunity and everyone has the ability to fulfill their potential, and he doesn't know if that's, we can actually achieve that, but by striving for it, we will make great victories. I mean, that sounded very, very communist to me, right? And I feel like there's a lot of people in the United States that because of this whole liberal Democratic Party anti-Russia thing, they just go out of their way to not like Russia. And to just look for any reason that, that Russia is not, I mean, the worst example of this is the Party of Socialism and Liberation guy, Brian Becker, right? He claims to not support the United States on Ukraine. But every time the Russian president says anything critical of Vladimir Lenin, he blows it up as performatively as he can. Oh my God, how dare he speak about Lenin? Because he's trying to perform for the liberals. And it's really, really pathetic. It's a really, really pathetic little performance that Brian Becker does. But I see this endlessly. It's like, the Soviet Union is very much part of Russia's history and heritage. And the Soviet Union, it needed big reforms in the 80s. It wasn't going to last, and it wasn't able to reform itself. So it collapsed, right? Through trying to reform, they ended up falling apart. But the idea that Russia, that's now on the battlefield fighting against a government that tears down World War II memorials, I see hammers and sickles everywhere in Russia now. I mean, everywhere, right? And pride in the Soviet history, and their economy is mostly run by the state, right? They've got, Gazprom and Rosneft, two giant state-controlled mega corporations that are running, that are at the center of the economy with their energy revenue. It's the basis for the, for very much, the economy. They're heavily tied in economically with China and with the Bolivarian countries of Latin America, et cetera. You know, I mean, it's just if you're someone who's genuinely anti-imperialist and genuinely a partisan of the communist movement, you should like Russia. That doesn't mean you have to consider Russia to be socialist. They don't consider themselves to be socialist. You don't have to consider Russia to be a communist country because they don't consider themselves to be that, right? The Communist Party is part of the government, and they're a respected part of the government, and that the Soviet heritage is very much a part of everything here. But at the same time, the idea that to be a communist, you must, must constantly hate Russia. You must, I mean, this has been really inculcated into people, and that we really, I mean, this fits in with an overall recurring theme that just comes back, on these streams over and over again, which is that we have to have nothing to do with the Democratic Party, no relationship to the Democratic Party. And it's not simply that the Democratic Party sells out what it stands for. It's that the Democratic Party is very much opposed to what those of us who are genuine anti-imperialists stand for. Degrowth is not what we stand for. Imperialism is degrowth. Iraq was degrown when George W. Bush invaded. Libya used to be the most prosperous country on the African continent, and now it's been degrown by the imperialists, right? We are not in favor of degrowth. Socialism has always been about growth, right? Stalin, with his 5-year plans, he built and constructed and industrialized. China is building highways and bridges and high-speed railway all over the world. We are all about growth and construction. It's the imperialists that are the degrowthers, right? So the Democratic Party is pushing degrowth. We're not. We're not pushing degrowth. And there's many examples of this that we can point to, but we have no loyalty to the Democratic Party. And that this mindset that says that, the Democrats are better, they just don't stay true to their principles. No. And in fact, in many ways, the Republicans are better. Not sure I would vote for them necessarily, but at this point, the Republicans are less warmongering than the Democrats are. At this point, the Republicans are less in favor of deep state repression than the Democrats are. I mean, I played for you that speech, by the Republican, member of Congress, Katie Britt, and she's appealing to Americans who are struggling economically, who want a strong government that'll stand up for them. Now, she wants that strong government to do a lot of bad things I don't agree with it, so it's complicated. But this idea that the Democrats are the party that is closer to us in some way, that has just got to be forgotten. That's just got to be forgotten. Because, I mean, it's just the Democratic Party at this point. I mean, the Democratic Party is doing things that the Republicans never would have dreamed of. For example, prosecuting the Uhuru movement. Right? Donald Trump was president for 4 years, and as hateful as he was, and as awful as Donald Trump was with various things that he said, he never indicted any communists. No communist activists were indicted or charged with being foreign agents. But the Joe Biden administration has indicted the African People's Socialist Party, charged them with being Russian agents for nothing, just because they had some Zoom calls, because they went to a conference in Russia. Right? Well, that right there tells you who's a bigger threat. I watched a piece by Jon Stewart that somebody sent me. And it was Jon Stewart going on and on and on about how Donald Trump is against the Constitution. Right? But it was all things that Donald Trump said. And that was what I noticed. It wasn't things Donald Trump did that were against the Constitution. It was things that he said. Donald Trump, when he's spouting off, has said many unconstitutional things. But he hasn't done them, right? When Donald Trump was president, he barely could do anything. Everything he did, he was fought on by the Democrats and by the mainstream media and by even the bulk of his own party. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is in office, and he has indicted the Uhuru movement. Joe Biden is in office. He's imprisoned all kinds of people with ridiculous sentences just because they went into the Capitol, right? Because they took a stroll into the Capitol building, right? All kinds of people are in prison for decades for doing nothing on January 6th, for walking into the Capitol building, right? All kinds of Tara Reid has had to flee the country. I mean, I'm telling you, right? I mean, if you want to talk about fascism, right? Donald Trump may have said fascistic sounding things. He said things about immigrants I didn't like. He said things about torture and other things I don't agree with. But Joe Biden's actually doing those things, right? I mean, and I mean, this is insane. And Kamala Harris is really who's on the ballot this fall. Okay, Kamala Harris is going to be president if Joe Biden is reelected, and that is something that should terrify all of us. And, you know, you'll be hearing more from me about that. I already wrote one book about Kamala Harris and how dangerous she is, but I intend to write a follow-up book. And we need people to realize that, because if you think Biden's America is scary, wait until you see who Kamala Harris really is and how dangerous Kamala Harris really is. Because I would argue Kamala Harris is probably the most dangerous presidential candidate, potential U.S. president, that has ever existed in American history. And that might sound like an overstatement. You might say, Caleb, that's crazy. Well, I'm just telling you, no, there has not ever, to my knowledge, been as deranged and sociopathic and vengeful and bloodthirsty a candidate for president as Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is extremely, extremely dangerous. You know, and she's wildly unpopular. She could never win an election. And they want to slip her in to the White House with Biden. You know, that's what they want to do. They want to slip her into the White House with Biden. They want Biden to get into office and then, you know, retire or finally admit he has dementia. You know, you want Biden to get reelected, and then they slip Kamala Harris into the presidency. We have to make sure that that does not happen, right? She is very dangerous. She is beyond dangerous. And that everything that I wrote in my book that came out in 2020 has been proven true to a much higher degree than I ever predicted, than I ever expected. Kamala Harris is extremely dangerous. She is extremely dangerous. And we have to raise the alarm, and we have to do our part, right? So, you know, you'll be hearing more about that from me in the coming weeks. And, you know, I've got plenty to say on it, but I just wanted to get that out of my system as well. But anyhow, folks, why don't we do the roll call, and then I'll start answering people's super chats. We got 9 super chats that have come in. So if there's something else people want me to answer in the second half of our program, by all means, just send me another super chat, and I will get to it. We got 9 to go through, but, you know, more is better. Do want to remind people to join the Center for Political Innovation and come to our national educational workshop in Vermont. It's going to be very, very awesome. I hope you will join us. It's going to be great. I hope you can sign up and attend our national educational retreat in Vermont. It's going to be very, very exciting. You know, if you can be there, it would be really, really great. It's 4 days in Vermont. You'll get to meet members of our organization. You'll get to participate in some workshops, and it'll be awesome. Getting to know you activities, etc. So I hope you can join us. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. We got John McCarthy in Chicago. Shout out to John McCarthy in Chicago. Hey, John. Very, very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Nate in Chicago. Nicholas in Miami. David in San Jose, California. Alex Rickle in Oregon. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Alex in Brazil. Montreal. Amsterdam. Jenny in Cincinnati. Patch in Arizona. Algonquin in Illinois. Sherry in New Jersey. Ed in Louisville. Terry Barnes in the UP of Michigan. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Ellie in Chicago. Wow, the whole Chicago gang's here. Nicole in Western Australia. Ian Chester in England. Seema in San Diego. Welcome. Mohsen from Iran. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Joe in New Jersey, home of the revolution. Briggy in Pennsylvania. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nicole from Western Australia. Welcome. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. All right. We got Penobscot Valley, Maine. All right. St. David's, Bermuda. Welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. All right. All righty. Okay. All right. So I guess at this point in the show, what we'll do is I'll start answering people's super chat questions. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell to make sure you get notified next time we do one of these. And if you got any further questions, send in a super chat, and I will try to answer these questions. Leaked audio reveals that the Israeli lobby has been pushing a TikTok ban for months. Did you know this? No, but that is interesting because I know there's a lot of free Palestine content on TikTok. And that's interesting that Israel has a particular interest. That's very, very interesting. And that Israel considers TikTok to be a threat. Isn't that interesting? Right? That's a very, very interesting bit of information. Thank you for sharing that. That's Battle Cossack, our friend in Argentina. Very, very good bit of information. But I thought TikTok was being controlled by the CIA through Oracle and used to censor dissident voices. Why do they want to ban it? Well, it sounds like they can't control it as much as they would like to, right? Because yes, all over TikTok, I mean, there's content that is not not anti-imperialist. All over TikTok, I've seen people that are anti-imperialist get suppressed, get their accounts banned. I mean, the idea that TikTok is some radicalizing vehicle for spreading the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, that's just not true. It's just absurd. It's just ridiculous. It just has no factual basis as far as I can tell. I mean, they say these things, but they have no basis in fact. So there we go. I'm going to start downloading John's speech. When we get to that, we can play John's speech. It's a great speech John gave on behalf of the Center for Political Innovation to the Uhuru movement. So I'm starting the download now to save time. So there we go. There we go. All right. Isn't it unconstitutional for Congress to pass a law that punishes a specific person or group? Doesn't a TikTok ban violate this clause? Technically, yes. My understanding, John, is the way they get around it is they make the law so specific it can only apply to them. Because you're right? For example, when they were going after RT, they passed a law. Oh, Christina in Portland. Cool. All right. They passed a law when they were going after RT. I remember this, which is that cable companies have the right to violate contracts with TV networks as long as it can be proven that those TV networks are funded by the Russian government. Right? It wasn't specifically for RT, but it was like, what other TV network in the United States is funded by the Russian government? Right? And that was a law that they passed, right, to help to basically get RT off the air in the United States, that cable companies could break contracts with any TV network that was funded by the Russian government, right? Didn't say RT technically, right? And there's a lot like that. And this, what's interesting is I'm glad it's not the Restrict Act again, because the Restrict Act was very crazy. This law, I believe it's something like, that you can't have a social media app that is owned by a Chinese parent company or something like that, right? Because I think it's like ByteDance is the name of the parent company, and it's like it's worded that way. But you're right. You can't pass a law for one person or entity. So the way they get around it is they come close. Now, some people have argued, and I think there have been people in the past who've argued that even doing that, right, is not constitutional. right? Even if it's not, you don't name the individual. If there's only one individual in mind, it's not constitutional. So there you go. People still believe the social credit myth in China. They say that you cannot call Taiwan a country or you lose points and get arrested, no evidence. Yeah, the social credit thing is just bullshit. I mean, it's bullshit on many, many levels. It's been so widely debunked, but they just say it over and over and over again. And I've noticed that with the anti-China stuff, and that there's a big effort, and this is what we're up against on the right, right? On the left, the left is full of its own insanity, but on the right, there's still this idiot anti-communism, this belief, oh, communism never worked anywhere. And on top of that, somehow they think that the woke left and the Chinese government are the same, which they are not, right? The Chinese Communist Party is not woke, right? And so there's an attempt to equate things that the right doesn't like about the United States with China, like the social credit system, right? Because we have social credit in the United States. I mean, that's why they smear people's reputations. They want to keep you from getting a job, right? I mean, it's social credit. I mean, it's all the things that they accuse China of doing with social credit. There are plenty of people in China who don't agree with the government and have jobs. Here in the United States, though, they are trying to make it so that if you support Palestine, you can't get a job, right? If you go on RT, you can't get a job. That's what they're trying to do, right? That's what they accuse China of doing. But there you go. You're on the list, Terry. All righty. Have you met members of the CPRF? Are there other communist parties in Russia? Yes, there were people from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation at the World Youth Festival. And there are other communist parties in Russia, but the CPRF is a real party. Okay. The CPRF is a real party. There's a smaller party called Communists of Russia. But the Trots all fled the country, as soon as the Ukraine war started, and they went to Paris, which tells you what intelligence agency they were working for. There are very few Trots in Russia, right? Nobody in Russia really wants to have anything to do with Trotskyism. Trotsky is viewed as a traitor. Trotsky is viewed as this weird guy who spent most of his life, in exile and, was involved in destabilizing the country. And that, to be a communist in Russia is kind of a nationalist statement, right? You're admiring the period when the Soviet Union existed, and you're admiring the strength of those years and the defeat of the Nazis, etc. The communists in Russia are, I will say that they are a minority, and that they admire Lenin, which most Russians do not. Most Russians consider Lenin to have been bad for the country's national interest, etc. The communists do admire Lenin. And that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is a very big political party, but it's not going to take power anytime soon. Right? It's not. It's kind of played out, right? They in 1996 they basically won the election. The USA rigged it against them, rigged it for Boris Yeltsin, and they, Zhuganov and the Communist Party, they don't have the strength to win it back. And then the smaller groups don't really have much of a mass base. There are many tiny little groups, the Russian Communist Workers' Party, and there's a couple others, but they don't really have a mass base. And even the Communists of Russia is a very, very small and irrelevant party. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation is a very big chunk of the government, right? It controls a number of seats and a number of territories, and they, they as a party, they are a big part of the government. They run relations with China. They do a lot of important things, labor unions, etc. But they're not going to come back to power anytime soon. They're just not going to, right? And that they are very much a party of nostalgia for the Soviet years. And that they are, they are a particular brand of nationalism, right? That Russia is a country that has been so viciously attacked by the imperialists, and Putin represents the country's rebirth. It's victory from the fall of the Soviet Union. It's reconstruction in the aftermath of that. The Communist Party represents the welfare state. Right, and their platform in the elections is generally a call for the expansion of the welfare state. They want more of a welfare state. They want, more social programs, etc. Meanwhile, the other opposition party is called the Liberal Democratic Party. And the Liberal Democratic Party tends to be a party more associated with the military, and they're more associated with, they're critical of Islam in some ways. They're ethnic nationalists. That's the Liberal Democratic Party. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, United Russia, which Putin used to be a member of, he's no longer a member of. That is the biggest political party in Russia. And they are mainly they are a Russian nationalist party. But, I don't even want to use that term because, when you say Russian nationalist, this was made very clear to me at the World Youth Festival. Russia has more Muslims in it than any non-Muslim country in the world, any other non-Muslim country. There are so many different nationalities in Russia, Siberians, there's so many different ethnic groups, many Russians that have like an Asian look to them, you would think are Asian. There's many different ethnic groups, Chechens, Azaris. There's just many, many different ethnic groups in Russia. So when we say Russian nationalist, right, that gives you the impression that we're fighting for people that look like me in Russia, right? People that look like white people in Russia. And what many people have pointed out is that Putin's support is actually bigger among the what you might call the national minorities, right? Muslims like Putin more than Christians do, right? It's just this idea that Russia is some kind of ethno-nationalist state or Orthodox nationalist state or something. That's just not. Putin has done a lot to win the respect of Muslims, and Muslims vote for him actually at a higher rate than Christians do in Russia, right? And so it's more complicated than you would think, right? It's more complicated than you would think, and but Putin very much stands for the country coming up from the disaster of the fall of the Soviet Union, becoming economically prosperous again, restoring its industrial base, and nostalgia for the Soviet Union, learning from China. And, Putin openly talked about how he studied Deng Xiaoping theory. Putin studied Deng Xiaoping and his economic reforms and studied the economic teachings of Deng Xiaoping. And Putin often will reflect in his speeches about how communism is an influence on him as a person, right? And how he came up in the Soviet Union as a communist, and he learned communist principles, and how the fall of the Soviet Union was the event that had the biggest impact on his life personally, and that you can't separate Putin from communism. And people try to do that. And they want to say, oh, Putin, no. Putin is very, very heavily influenced by communism, but he's not a communist, right? Putin is Putin. And, the Soviet Union is not coming back. Putin frequently says that if you don't mourn the loss of the Soviet Union, you have no heart. And if you think the Soviet Union is going to come back, you have no brain. And he said that many times. And what I find to be infuriating is Western media will be like, oh my God, he mourned the loss of the Soviet Union. Oh, it's a scandal that he said that, right? Because we're so brainwashed in the United States. We don't know that following the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a huge disaster in the country, right? And it's supposed to be that the fall of the Soviet Union was this great thing because everyone got freedom. No, the fall of the Soviet Union was an economic disaster. Mass hunger, mass unemployment, people starving on the streets, drug gangs. And the fall of the Soviet Union, the 1990s in Russia were a very bad time. And the reason Putin is very popular is because he rescued the country from that, because he reasserted government control over oil and gas, and he used the oil and gas money to rebuild the economy and stabilize, and he took care of people, right? He took economic moves to make a better life for the people. And, in US media, we're just taught, I was a kid in the 90s, and the story that we had in our head was that everything was great in Russia because they were free, right? It was like, oh, the Soviet Union was so awful and everyone was starving and miserable because communism, everyone knows communism's bad. And then in the 1990s, there were all these fireworks because they got their freedom. And it's like, no, there was an economic disaster here of, insane free market capitalism that demolished the country. And just, I mean, and they lost 10% of their population. People either died or left the country by the millions. I mean, it was a disaster. Economist Andre Gunder Frank calls it economic genocide, what was done to the former Soviet Union. I mean, it was absolute disaster. So there you go. You know, there's ultras and trots that claim Putin jailed communists. No, the Communist Party is a major party here. I mean, it has seats in the government, a lot of seats and stuff. Are there people that are involved in trying to destabilize Russia for the United States that might call themselves communists? Sure. You know, that's another thing. This always happens, right? You know, there's a group of young students in China that were arrested. It says China arrests communist student organizers. Well, you know, I mean, America arrests capitalist student organizers all the time. I mean, just because these people are young and they're organizing and they happen to be communists doesn't mean they didn't do something illegal, right? And, you know, we also know that creating instability in the communist countries of the world and in anti-imperialist countries has generally involved using Trotskyites, using anarchists, using, you know, different elements, right? You know, look, I mean, I think there are neo-Maoists in China that want to go back to the Gang of Four time that are funded by the United States. Do you think the United States, or is the United States ultra-Maoist, wants to go back to the 70s? No, but they're useful in causing unrest. So there we go. Marjorie Taylor Greene also denounced the TikTok ban. Well, good for her. That's great. I mean, that is tremendous, because I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know, sometimes she really gets things right. I'll just say that much. And that's really good. You know, and I mean, I know not everything she does and says is good, but you know, we gotta get past this idea that we have some loyalty to the Democrats, because the Democrats at this point, just as during the Bush years, you know, it wasn't about supporting the Democrats. It was understanding that Bush was the main thrust of oppression coming from the system. Right now, it's the Democrats that are the main thrust. That doesn't mean we support the Republicans, right? Just like we didn't support the Democrats during the Bush years. And most of the Republicans are going along with what the Democrats are doing, just like most of the Democrats went along with what Bush was doing. So, you know, I didn't vote for John Kerry, you know, but I mean, but we can recognize that, you know, Bush was the face of what capitalism and imperialism was doing and how they were moving ahead against the people in those years. And now Biden and especially Kamala Harris are the face of that in our time. So I'm going to put on John's speech. This is John McCarthy, our member, and he gave this speech at the meeting of the Uhuru movement. So we're going to put on John's speech. So here we go. It's a great speech.
From the Center of Political Innovation, John McCarthy.
Hello. The Center for Political Innovation salutes the life-saving work that you're doing here in St. Louis, obstructing and reversing gentrification and other forms of genocide. And we bear witness that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has been fighting this same fight since before this Russian guy was even born. And quite frankly, probably since before his parents even met. But the most dangerous thing about this prosecution, the most dangerous thing about the case is, so what if it really was Russian ideas? It's bad enough that this state is constructing a wall to keep out the people that they call foreign. But now they're even building a wall to keep out the ideas that they say are foreign. And that's not healthy. It's never healthy for society to do that. But right now, it's insane. Because if you look around you, this system we're living under is collapsing and crashing and dying, while the global south is rising. China, in the past 2 decades, has lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty. In that same amount of time, homelessness here has multiplied several times under almost every single bridge in this country on house or living. China has a national network of trains that can go as fast as airplanes. But if our trains try to go as fast as a car, they fall off the track and they poison entire towns. During the pandemic,
Oh. There seems to be something wrong with the video. That's odd. Okay. Hold on. We'll try to get the rest of John's speech. Don't know why that happened there. That was very, very odd. So I will download it one more time. And hopefully this time we get the whole thing, because that was, during the pandemic was where it cut off. So there we go. Hold on. We'll try to get you the rest of the speech there. There we go. So we're working on that. Okay. That was weird. Never had that problem before. But yeah, there we go. There we go. It was a great speech by John. So I hope we get to see the rest of it. I've got it started to download once again. I've never had my YouTube downloader give me that kind of problem before, but a lot of things are going on. But there we go. But as it's downloading once again, I guess we can continue. Is it possible for you to talk to John Stossel? He's talking about left-wing degrowth. Well, I could probably react to it. I don't know if he would want to talk to me. I mean, John Stossel drives me up the wall in many, many ways. His programming is just classic economic cliches. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, they showed us he had like a series he did that was supposed to be kind of edgy. It was like, are we really number one? And it was like saying that like America wasn't really number one, right? And that was supposed to be like edgy and liberal kind of, because he was saying we're not really number one. We always say we're number one in America. We're not really number one. But every program that he did in that "Are We Really Number One" series was like arguing that we needed to privatize things. We needed to make things worse somehow. Like one of the things was he was talking about how much better education is in Europe, which it is, right? Kids in Europe get better test scores than Americans do. All that's true. And so then based on that, he was saying, so that's why we need to privatize. We need to have school choice. We need to privatize public schools in the United States. And I'm just like, wait a second. In Europe, they have government paying for education. They have a lot more state involvement in education. That's just absurd. And one point I remember he has a video where he tries to argue that, the Asian tiger countries are more free market, right? That was another thing that he uses, right? He goes to Hong Kong, he goes to, the island of Taiwan, he goes to South Korea and says, oh, look at these countries. Their economy is doing well. They're having so much growth because the government's not involved. The government's heavily involved in those countries. A huge amount of state involvement in Hong Kong and on the island of Taiwan and in South Korea. Education is free in Europe. It's just ridiculous. So, but he does that and he kind of would play on people's ignorance. And it's always, he has this libertarian, Milton Friedman, if we just privatize everything, that is underlying everything he does. And he tries to sound edgy when he talks about it. Right. I'm not shocked he's on Fox News now, but it's like, it took him a while to be on Fox News because his tone, he didn't sound like a conservative. He sounded like a liberal. He sounded like, kind of like an edgy intellectual, but it was always leading to, and that's why we should have crazy free market policies. Right. All right. So let's try John one more time. Right. We'll try John one more time. Hold on.
From the center.
Okay. So
they fall off the track and they poison entire towns. During the pandemic, first they said masks didn't work, and then they said they worked, and they asked Fauci why. He said, well, we didn't have enough masks So we had to lie. So China didn't have enough big giant hospitals. They built them overnight. We couldn't even build flimsy little paper things fast enough. So this state is like a man lying on the floor, bleeding to death from a bullet wound to the stomach. And with his last ounce of strength, he picks up a rifle and guards the door to make sure no paramedics or doctors come in. They've got the nerve, the gall, to say that what this brave soldier did was suicide. They're committing mass suicide and they're trying to take us with them. So that's what this case is all about. It's not about the people have the freedom to debate whether the fake president should have orange hair or blue hair. It's about whether we will have the freedom and whether the people will have, whether we will have the freedom to speak, and will the people have the opportunity to hear those vital truths and ideas that they need to survive this moment in history. So that's what's at stake in September. That's why you have to win. And that's why the people had better wake up, stand up, and do everything necessary to make sure that you win.
Right, John McCarthy.
That's great. Yeah, I can't think of a better representation of our organization. I said many great things about China, many great things about the new world and the need for new ideas. Uhuru. Uhuru is right. And welcome, Sue in Italy. Welcome, welcome. Great job, John. Excellent, excellent. So we have got 2 more super chats here for me to answer. So if anyone else has anything else they want me to comment on before I go to bed tonight, I will do so. Looks like the program that I'm here for is going to start up tomorrow. So I don't know if I'll be streaming as much, but we'll see. I'm just going to try to stream when I can. But there you go. So if anyone else has anything else they want me to comment on, speak now or forever hold your super chat, or until next time, I guess. Thoughts on the mysterious death of Boeing whistleblower unaliving himself before he was to give evidence before the Substandard Safety Committee. That's interesting. That's interesting. Do you have his name, Funky? Because I would like to look into this case. I would really like to look into this case. Sounds very interesting, right? I do know that there was, a few years ago, there was, a case of airplanes being damaged and people getting threatened before they testified about it. So I'm curious about this case. So if you can get his name to me, Funky, that would be very, very much of interest. Absolutely. And how big of a role do you believe the CIA played in the Watergate scandal? Well, let me just say this, Terry. First of all, I'm not an expert on the Watergate scandal. I don't know that much about it. I mean, I know the basics. I read The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby, which goes into great detail, but a lot of it has slipped out of my mind. But what I will say is this, right? There were the main driving force behind the Watergate scandal was the press, right? The press decided to make an issue out of it, right? The Washington Post and the New York Times, both, they ran with it and they ran with it and they ran with it. If they hadn't decided to run with it, there wouldn't have been a Watergate scandal. But the Washington Post and the New York Times both decided to push it. And that tells you that there was a feeling within the intelligence apparatus that Nixon was untrustworthy. Now, I have often quoted, and in my upcoming book, the new textbook I'm writing for Vermont, I quote Vince Copeland talking about the Rockefellers, why they did not like Richard Nixon. And in previous writing that I've done, I've often said I kind of feel sorry for Richard Nixon. I mean, Richard Nixon was a mass murderer, right? I mean, he killed millions of people in Vietnam. He told the FBI to take the gloves off and viciously go after COINTELPRO. I used to work for Ramsey Clark, and he fired Ramsey Clark. He actually said, the first thing I do when I get elected is fire Ramsey Clark, right? Part of his whole law and order thing was brutally suppressing the Black liberation movement. So I don't think Nixon was a good guy. I mean, he wasn't a good guy in a lot of ways, okay? However, Nixon, in order to do what he did, he was a little bit of a Bonapartist, okay? And that's something that it's hard for people on the left to admit, right? This is something, I shouldn't, how do I put this? Like, people that are involved in like organized activist groups often don't have the ability to step back and observe the whole picture, right? Right? Nixon, it's very clear, was removed by the ruling class of the United States. Does that mean he was a communist? No. Does that mean he was good? No. It meant that he served his purpose, and in the process of serving his purpose, he was too powerful. He became too powerful, right? Nixon came into office because, the political crisis of the 1960s had escalated to the point that the United States was, as a society, it was very unstable. 1968, after the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968, every single major city went up in flames with urban rebellions. You had the Vietnam War protest movement, and there was just a huge amount of instability in the United States. And Richard Nixon was this kind of right-wing strongman who came into office. He was going to stabilize the country. And in order to do it, he had to take some dramatic moves. And one thing he did was he escalated the Vietnam War, and then he withdrew. He lowered the voting age to 18. He created the Environmental Protection Agency. He created the Office of Safety and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. He had some of the first affirmative action policies. Now, he didn't do all of this because he was good. He did it because these were dramatic moves intended to stabilize the country. He aligned himself, he kind of mobilized the hard hat riots, which were groups of construction worker guys who supported him, who went around beating up hippies and anti-war people. I mean, he was a right-wing authoritarian. Things had gotten in the country to the point that sections of the ruling class that would normally not want that kind of thing were okay with it because they were afraid of the instability in the country. The other thing that he did was that he aligned with China. Right? He started the process of the USA aligning with China against the Soviet Union. And he did that because they were, the global communist movement was on the rise. And if they didn't find a way to confuse and destabilize it, they were just going to be defeated. And so Henry Kissinger arranged for Richard Nixon to go to China. Richard Nixon advocated a guaranteed minimum income for all citizens, which people don't talk about that, but he was for universal basic income, right? So there were aspects of Nixon that, and that he was happy to unleash neoliberalism on Chile, right? The coup in Chile, he was all for that. But he was not willing to enact economic neoliberalism in the United States because he needed to stay in power. He needed those hard hats. The people who supported Nixon, the stereotype of a Nixon supporter was a construction worker guy with a hard hat, a hardworking guy who hates hippies and loves his country. Well, those hard hats needed to have good paying jobs or else they weren't going to support Nixon. Right. When there was an economic downturn in 1972, Nixon imposed the Nixon shocks, they were called. And it was a wage and price freeze. And he kicked Milton Friedman out of the White House. He said, we're all Keynesians now. And he basically understood that if he was going to be able to stay in power, he needed to make sure the economy didn't sink. And so he had to deliver the goods. Nixon was not a progressive. Nixon wasn't a good guy, but he was trying to hold on to power. And he had a lot of it. And when he was ousted, that was the beginning of the neocons. When Gerald Ford became president, Gerald Ford was a Republican who'd been the vice president. And, first it was Spiro Agnew, who was his vice president. Spiro Agnew was forced to step down. And then Nixon was also forced to step down. And then Gerald Ford became president. And Gerald Ford, he brought Ayn Rand and to the White House so that she could accompany the swearing in of her protege, Alan Greenspan. And it was Gerald Ford's administration that brought us Alan Greenspan and brought Alan Greenspan into federal government. He eventually ran the Federal Reserve and the Council on Foreign Relations. I believe that. And thank you. I'll get to that in a second. The other thing that Nixon did that Gerald Ford did is that it was Gerald Ford who also brought, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld into government. And the Gerald Ford presidency after Nixon, that was a moment where, like, Nixon had roots in the old right, in like the John Birch Society, the hard right, whereas Gerald Ford was a neocon. And the neocons really got their foot in the door when Nixon was ousted. Now, Ronald Reagan had some roots in the hard right, but he was forced to pick Bush as his running mate, and that Reagan's presidency was very much a neocon presidency in many, many ways. But that old right, the hard right, the libertarian right, the John Birch Society, those kind of people were always seen as a threat by the Rockefellers, by the Eastern establishment, because those folks, they want economic growth, and they don't want any controls on capitalism, right? And that the John Birch Society, the hard right, those kind of people, they had backed Nixon from the beginning. Nixon was a McCarthyist when he started. Because Nixon had been a McCarthyist, and because Nixon had to have that hard hat base among the population in order to do what he did and stabilize U.S. society, he needed to have, he wasn't willing to go along with economic neoliberalism in the same way. So it's funny because his whole career was based on anti-communism, and that economic neoliberalism is also centered around anti-communism. But Nixon, he took government moves to stabilize the economy because he wanted to maintain stability of the economy and have a base of people that were loyal to him. So there you go. There you go. And I've written about this, and you have to write about these things with nuance. But, there's a lot of people that don't understand that, like, just because somebody is at odds with the American political establishment doesn't mean they're good. And just because somebody is at odds with the American political establishment and you point that out doesn't mean you're endorsing them. I'm not endorsing Nixon. I'm just telling you that Nixon's ouster didn't come from a good place, and that Nixon, a lot of what he did for his own reasons was against the interests of U.S. imperialism, or maybe was in the interests of U.S. imperialism, but hurt U.S. capitalists or the Eastern establishment in the short term. These things are very complicated, very, very complicated. Okay, his name was John Barnett. So I will have to look up John Barnett. Thank you, Funky, for that important bit of information. All right, folks. I guess we will have to put on the closing music. Hopefully I'll be back streaming soon. I'm headed back to the United States next week after the elections are over. So yeah.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.